The London Chess Classic exploded into life in round 7. I could have picked several games as my game of the day, but I've gone with this one. Magnus Carlsen against Hikaru Nakamura. Of course, Carlsen has a huge plus record against Nakamura. And, well, psychologically, I think it would be tough if Carlsen couldn't beat him. Up to this moment, Carlsen, of course, had 6 draws, so was this the moment when he could score his first win? And for Nakamura, of course, psychologically, if he could draw or beat Carlsen, it would mean a great deal to him. Well, this game lasted 7 hours and was in doubt right until the last few moves. Let's see what happened. After 40 moves, they reached this position. Carlsen slowly turned the screws on Nakamura, and by this point you can see that with the 2 bishops against the 2 knights, White has a clear advantage. There's really only one player going for the win here, and that's Carlsen. I mean, there are various ways that you could try to make progress here. Maybe even bring the king round to somewhere on the queen side around here. And try to get a breakthrough. But Carlsen ploughed on up the king side. I'm just going to go through these first moves fairly quickly, just to kind of sketch out roughly what Carlsen's plan is. Of course, at the moment, Nakamura has some kind of a fortress, but yeah, there are many ways in which White can attempt to break this down. So first of all, Carlsen gaining space on the king side, and he's moving in with the king, and slowly gaining ground with the bishops. Now, I wonder if a6 was necessary. We'll see later on that there are slight drawbacks with this move. So Carlsen advancing the h-pawns. All these moves, very careful. I'm going to stop and look at variations in detail in a second. But just for the moment, we can see that, well, both players had to play very carefully. And Carlsen slowly making progress on the king side. I don't think Black really wants to play f6. That would weaken the g7 pawn terribly and open up these diagonals, and really I think that would be too dangerous. Carlsen playing h5 and knight f6, and finally he gets in this pawn break. So there's a few checks here. Unfortunately for White, the king has to go backwards in this position, but now after pawn takes, it comes forward and captures this pawn. So Carlsen has made definite progress in that he can bring his king further down the board to attack the pawn on f7. So slowly things are loosening in the Black camp. You can see it's tough for Black to defend against the long-range bishops because that knight needs to block the pawn on b7. So, obviously White can play on 2 sides of the board here with the bishops. So now it's tough. King coming in and White getting closer to attacking that f7 pawn. But with those knights hopping around the board, you have to be extremely careful. So already there's something threatened here. So the bishop had to defend instead of taking here. Yeah, in which case knight takes pawn check would have been strong. Knight f2. So once again, bishop takes b7 could be met by knight takes f5, followed by taking the bishop. So the bishop had to come all the way back so as to maintain protection over that pawn. And Nakamura repeated the position, or wanted to repeat the position anyway. And here is, I think, the first really critical moment. I think Carlsen has done very well to achieve this position. It's not absolutely clear to me that it's winning, but it's certainly making progress. Here Nakamura played the pawn to f6, and I have to say, when that was played, I didn't like the move, because it felt as though White's king was given an option sometimes to come back to g6. Didn't look right, and suddenly it was just the knight protecting that f-pawn. I thought that Black should wait in some way, perhaps with this knight move. But little by little, White can make progress. Let me show you one variation, just as an example. So these knights doing their best to hassle the bishops and the pawns and come back. But here, well, this is really, really tough. Let me give an example of how White might break Black here. So, well, there's a lot of shuffling, but okay, a typical position. You can see that bishop controls these diagonals, so it's not possible for Black's knight to check the king. That knight can't move because, well, it needs to protect its comrade on f6, and anyway, b7 is on. And, well, if the king moves, then f7 drops. Basically, Black is cracking here. The position is Zugzwang, and not untypical of many, many variations. So that's why Nakamura played f6. I should mention that round about this point, Carlsen was down to round about 2 minutes time, and in time he had 2 minutes to make all his moves. Now he was getting, of course, 30 seconds added to his time each time he made a move, but still he was under severe pressure. Just getting to this position required so much precision, so much calculation, that he used up most of his time. Nakamura, on the other hand, had around about 20 minutes, over 20 minutes remaining, so he could play for all kinds of tricks here. Bishop e4 played. Now, if the knight comes back to c6 to block the path to the b pawn, then the bishop comes back, and this is winning. Of course, if the knight moves, then this one is going to drop. Knight f2 played. Now the bishop had to go back, and the players repeated, and bishop came to e4 again. So Nakamura hoping to repeat the position, but this time Magnus had worked something out. He took on b7. Now this is the reason why I say that earlier maybe it was a mistake to put that pawn on a6. Who knows, it might not have made a huge difference to the position, but still. Sometimes it gives White the option to take here. Now, if knight takes f5 check, then king takes f6, and that must be winning for White. Extra pawn here, supported by the bishops, and the knights are, well, they're without firm support, so they're just kind of floating around in the middle, can be pushed by the king and the knights and the bishops. So knight d3, hitting the pawn, hitting the bishop. And it looks like Nakamura missed this next move of Carlsen. Carlsen played king takes pawn, allowing knight takes bishop, but then king f5, attacking both knights. Now this is an extraordinary situation where suddenly, without support from pawns, those knights are once again cast adrift on the open sea of the board. Now, well, they have to protect them, and White has 2 extra pawns here, so knight f e2. And now, well, Carlsen, rather short of time, actually made a terrible mistake. I thought at the time that the simplest way to win would just be to take that third pawn, and I think that the knights simply can't coordinate very well, and 3 pawns is just going to be too much. And even if Black sacrifices a knight for one of these pawns, well, White's going to have enough to win. Instead, Carlsen played f6, which also looks incredibly good, but let's see what happened. a5. Okay, that saves that one. a4, well, that prevents the knight coming to b5, sometimes stopping that pawn. King f7. I think that's the only move to keep black in the game. Bishop d5. And here Nakamura played king f8. He should have played king g6. Now let me show you the basic idea. So white pushes the pawn, black takes, and I think this position is just a draw, incredibly. So, well, let's try and win anyway. Bishop d5 check, pushes the king away from the pawn. Now black must play king f8, otherwise king g6 would shepherd the pawn home. Or bishop c4 and pushing the knight away, and then king e6. Well, actually, let me just show you that. King g6, let's push the knight away, and then we play king e6 and white wins. However, in this position, instead of coming up the board, king f8. And the problem is, if the king goes over to try to capture the a-pawn, then black's knight comes over. This is really important. The knight stops the king going to b5, and in this position, knight takes, and king f7 is just a draw. And, well, try as I might, I don't see a way around that. It's not possible to trap the knight, but that is the basic saving resource, and I think that position is a draw. But instead of king g6, Nakamura played king f8. And here, you don't have to play c6. c6 would be a draw, as in that previous variation. And the king will approach the f-pawn. But instead, Carlsen found king e4, an excellent move. So the king can't approach the f-pawn, and white's king keeps these knights busy. So, for example, if black waits with king e8, then king e3, and then bishop c4, and you can simply pick up one of these knights. In the game, knight c2 happened, now c6, king comes up, but those knights are just miles away, and after knight takes a4, there really is nothing better. Bishop b3, beautiful move, forking the knights. You don't see that one very often. Actually, you see it in the Lopez sometimes, with a black knight on c6 and a knight on e4 if it captures on e4, and then bishop d5. That's true, you see it there, but okay, still rather unusual. Knight came back, bishop takes, and c7, and in this position, after king f7, bishop takes a4, black resigned. That one's going to be easy. By the way, instead of king f7, if the pawn had gone to a3, this wins. This one's different because the bishop not only stops the pawn, but also prevents black's king approaching the f-pawn. And in this case, it's a very easy task for white's king to come over and shepherd that one home. Well, eventually, king d7 and c8, that's a win. Well, an extraordinary performance by Magnus Carlsen. 7 hours the game lasted. I think there were some really delicate steps there. It took fantastic precision, incredible precision, just to reach this kind of breakthrough point, actually. And perhaps we can forgive Magnus for a little misstep right at the end. But it was a brilliant display. White had to play so accurately. Poor old Hikaru came so close to drawing. But it was an extraordinary round. There were some great games. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave crushed Vichy Anand. It was a really nice game. Poor old Vichy. He was playing on his birthday, not the best birthday present. And Levon Aronian crushed Vasilin Topalov. Another really nice game. So that means, and the other two games were drawn, that means that after 7 rounds, MVL leads with 4.5 out of 7. Carlsen, Giri, Grishuk, Aronian all on 4. Caruana, Nakamura, Adams on 3.5, and Anand 2.5, Topalov 1.5. So 2 games to go, and MVL is a half a point clear.